Hello guys, it's Thomas and here doing the Bakugan BakuTech Retrospect episode. This is episode 7 on St. Aquas. St. Aquas was originally released in BTC 14 as a booster, but the same exact version was re-released later in BCV 26 Best Selection. It is an Aquas Bakugan, and its G-Power setup is very awkward, having two separate G-Powers there of 340Gs and 200Gs. However, in its main mode, these are to be combined into one G-Power, which is consistent with the other G-Powers of the time, but in its smaller mode, it only uses the smaller G-Power. Standard versions of St. Aquas can have a combined G-Power of 540Gs, 550Gs, or 580Gs, and all of them have a small G-Power of 200Gs. And St. Aquas was released in March of 2011. Looking at its ball form, St. Aquas is quite detailed. You can see it has kind of a cobalt shade of blue for the plastic, a lot of white and yellow markings, of course kind of these dragon-like designs as well. That metal on the sole pieces. Very, very nice looking Bakugan all around. Opening it up, St. Aquas has a fairly dynamic design and also quite a few manual parts. So starting off here, we of course have the sole pieces, which are fairly standard. Also this tail, which you can pop out. And then these parts here, which they fold out, and you actually put them wherever you want. They can go all the way back here if you want, but usually they're just sort of upwards, but something like that. There we go. And now St. Aquas is fully transformed. Also, just as a bit of an unfortunate side note, this part here on my St. Aquas is a bit damaged. So it is a bit more loose than it should be, but it still functions fun enough, and plus I've had other recolors to test with and everything, so everything is fine. It just might look a little awkward at points, but anyway. Taking a better look at the physical design though, you can see it is a really, really nice looking Bakugan. Very well detailed, quite large. Honestly, just a very impressive Bakugan. For only being the 7th Bakugan released in BakuTech, honestly just very, very surprising that it's this good. As far as its physical attributes go, it does of course have the two sole pieces that are metal that I mentioned, but also has two cross pieces, one here on the neck, and then also one back here on the tail. These are typically plastic, but also St. Aquas does have another mode. If you actually grab St. Aquas, you'll see underneath the feet here, there is a switch which allows it to change modes into the smaller mode that I mentioned earlier. And now St. Aquas has a much, much smaller design. Also, these yellow manual parts in the back here are no longer in use. They are meant to stay down. And like I mentioned earlier, this is a low G setup, so it only uses the lower G power, in this case being at 200 Gs for the standard St. Aquas. Moving on to how to close St. Aquas, of course you want to get all of the manual parts closed up. Sole pieces just go in, these yellow parts come down, then this tail will also fold back in like that. Looking at how to close the main parts though, the head just kind of pops back here, and then you have to kind of push the neck inward, which can be a little bit awkward, but then that goes in, which allows you to push the tail on top of that. So these parts are kind of held in place. Now the wings can be a little bit awkward, but you kind of just pop them in, and they should just stay without too much trouble. And then sometimes these parts will go out a little bit, but you just kind of press them down and it's no big deal. And yeah, St. Aquas is closed. Now to talk a bit about the anime and manga, St. Aquas was owned by Quilt. Quilt was this odd ancient character who was pretty friendly with the main cast, and his guardian Bakugan was St. Aquas, and based on his own lore, yeah, that does add up. Unfortunately, St. Aquas never got any evolutions or anything, so it was Quilt's guardian Bakugan for the entire run of BakuTech. And that's really all to note about it. So let's go ahead and move on to the variants. The clear version was released in BTC 33 Saint Dragon Ultra Hybrid set, with re-releases in BCV 21 White Radiance and BCV 22 Grey Dragon. The original set version had a combined G-Power of 580Gs and a low G-Power of 200Gs. The White Radiance version could also have this amount, but alternatively could have a combined G-Power of 600Gs and a low G-Power of 180Gs. The Grey Dragon version also had a combined G-Power of 600Gs, however the low G-Power was 200Gs. The red version was released in BTA-08, the Super 5 set, and had a combined G-Power of 620Gs and a low G-Power of 200Gs. Also worth noting, unlike every single other St. Aquas, it released with plastic soul pieces rather than metal soul pieces. The silver version was released as a Bakutomo lottery campaign prize. It had a combined G-power of 580Gs and a low G-power of 200Gs. The gold version was also released as a Bakutomo lottery campaign prize, also with a combined G-power of 580Gs and a low G-power of 200Gs. The blue metallic version was released through various different sweepstakes, most notably via Korokoro and the BakuTech manga. This also had a combined G-power of 580Gs and a low G-power of 200Gs. Lastly, we have somewhat of an oddball. This is St. Aquas Kai, which was meant to be released as BTC 59, however, this never was released, we never got pictures or anything like that. Like other Kai Bakugan, it's assumed that this would have had extra metal somewhere, but ultimately we don't know as this seemingly got cancelled, and as far as I'm aware, no prototypes or anything like that exist of it. Moving over to competitive, this thing was actually pretty insane when it first released. Its ability to have 4 metal pieces was quite notable for the time, but also it was much larger than every single other Bakugan, and its pure defense was really only outdone by Kiel. However, again, it had more occupancy, so this thing was really good at the time, plus it also had its low G setups, and that smaller mode could also be used for double stands. This thing had a lot of utility. It honestly functioned as a really good hybrid Bakugan for most of BakuTech, really only getting one-upped in BakuTech Ganchi by Dragon Dragon, which, yeah, does everything better than St. Aquas, but that doesn't mean St. Aquas became bad because of that. There aren't many genuinely good hybrid Bakugan in BakuTech, and this is still one of them. Even by late BakuTech, having 4 metal pieces is solid, and the neck and tail are still positioned fairly low, so you still get solid defense out of this thing with pretty good occupancy. And again, the 4 metal pieces means the thing is at least solid for attack as well. Plus, it also has its low G setups and potential double stand uses. And to me, this makes it about mid-A tier. Even by the end of BakuTech, this was still a really solid option. But anyways, that's really about it for St. Aquas. It's a very interesting Bakugan, there's a lot to say about it. Honestly, it felt very ahead of its time, considering it was only the 7th Bakugan ever released as an original Bakugan within BakuTech, also the first ever Aquas Bakugan in BakuTech, and it did a great job. But that's really about it. Next episode will be on Bland Shelt, so stay tuned for that. But until then, thanks for watching, and bye.